Jeremy Wilson joining us today. So, Jeremy, why don't you take it away?
Thanks so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you to David and Teo and Jason for having this thing and for inviting me to come here. So my understanding is that most of what you guys have been doing on the International Trombone Hang has been like warm-up sessions and master classes. I think I might be one of the first sort of like in the lecture series, which sounds super boring. I realize that. So I'm going to do my very best to make it not boring. Um, I I am at heart a wannabe storyteller, and so I'm going to do a lot of that today. My idea for the way this would go is that I want to talk a little bit about a concept that's near and dear to my heart and that's been on my mind a lot lately, which is the concept of body, mind, and spirit and holistic music making. And then I want to tell a little bit about my story, about how I went from middle of nowhere Tennessee to playing in the Vienna Philharmonic to now teaching at Vanderbilt, because a lot of the body, mind, spirit stuff that I'm talking about now is directly related to my story and my biography and the things that I learned through that time. And then I have a little presentation where I use kind of a thought experiment of if you could hop in a time machine and go back in time and tell yourself something at a younger age, what would you tell yourself, right? And so I have this list of things, 11 things that I would like to tell my younger self. Sounds a little bit like a BuzzFeed article, I know, but I think it'll be pretty cool anyway. And then hopefully at the end of it, we're going to have some time for questions. So um, my name is Jeremy Wilson, and I teach at Vanderbilt University here in Nashville, Tennessee, which for those that are not familiar with American geography is in the southeast part of Tennessee. Um, or the southeast part of the U.S. Most Europeans know where Florida is, for good or ill, and Florida's hat is Georgia, and Georgia's hat is Tennessee. So we're two states above Florida. Um, so this body mind spirit thing that I've been talking a lot about, for those that might follow me on social media or things like that, um, it came about over the course of my entire career, and it's based on the idea that the very best music that you can make is music that you make with your whole self, and that in any art form, be it music, dance, theater, culinary arts, I would even say athletics, right? Anything that's movement based and an art form requires three things: skills, knowledge, and passion. I call those body, mind, and spirit. And as musicians, through the education process and through the career building process, we very often get sort of sidetracked. Very often we start with a lot of passion, and we love music and we love what it can do for humanity and for the world. And our hearts are completely in it. And then over the course of learning about it or trying to get good at it, all our attention gets shifted towards the skills and the knowledge, the body and the mind part. And most of the people that I have worked with over the last 10 to 15 years through master classes or through my students at Vanderbilt, um, the probably 98% of the problems that they face because one of those three areas of their music making is either underdeveloped or is interfered with in some way. There's something getting in the way, or they're out of balance. And so I've developed this method, this process that helps people identify where they are on that spectrum, right? What is the area of my music making where I need to develop or I need to remove interference, and helping them achieve balance for that. So, for example, somebody that has wonderful technique. I know you will probably all think of people that pop up in your mind when I give these examples. So think of someone that you know that has wonderful technique, can play circles around everybody, and is an expert in their field. They know everything there is to know about music. But when you hear them play, they have nothing to actually say, right? It doesn't touch you. It doesn't inspire you. You don't want to buy their albums. You don't want to listen to them play. It's impressive, but not meaningful. Think of another person, perhaps also who has really wonderful technique and who has passion in their playing, but there's essential knowledge that they don't know. And so it inhibits their music making. The person that comes to mind for me, I'm not going to use their name, is a freelancer here in this area who came to me and had a couple lessons with me and was very frustrated with the course of their career because they go, I play really well and I care so much, but I've never really been able to get past that hump in the audition process. I hit a wall, or I advance but don't get selected, right? And then they started playing through their excerpts for me, and it became really apparent to me why they haven't advanced. And it was because there's certain things that they didn't know. So for example, the fact that Mozart and Wagner were writing music 100 years apart and has a different style to it, they didn't really know that. And so Mozart sounded like Wagner, which sounded like Strauss, which sounded like Hindemith. Everything sounded the same. There was no stylistic knowledge there. Or I think he was playing the Bach saraband that we very many of us play. uh, and I go, so of course in a saraband the emphasis or something interesting happens on the second beat, and he looked at me like, what are you talking about? There was essential knowledge that was missing. So in his case, what he needed to work on was the things that he didn't know. And then I feel like this reflects me in college, at least. You can probably think of people that know a lot about music and care so much and have passion, but the technique isn't there. They have trouble putting those ideas into the instrument and actually having them come out the instrument. So that seems pretty obvious. They need to work on their skill level and their craft, right? So the whole idea is that in the music making process, you have these three areas of yourself, and for many people, they're either out of balance or interfered with in some way. Where I have kind of taken this line of thinking a step or two further is I've also said that it applies not only in the music making process, but also in the career building process. That if you want to be a wonderful musician, but also have a career in the music field, again, there are skills you need, there's knowledge you need, and there's a heart component to it. There's relationship and there's networking and things like that, knowing how to treat people. Also, I go a step further and say that your personal health and wellness actually plays a huge role in not only achieving your goals, but being happy once you get there, right? And so I'll use that as a little bit of a segue to talk about my story. So I grew up here in rural Tennessee, um, and didn't even really know anything about trombone or band music or orchestra music. I was raised essentially on country music in the 1980s. The greatest hits of the Judds and Randy Travis and a few people like that. Lee Greenwood, for those that know who that is now my neighbor in my neighborhood, which is really kind of fun. I grew up listening to that stuff, and but I was around music a lot. And then in high school, I watched this movie called Mr. Holland's Opus, and it's about a music educator who wanted to be a composer, but felt he was settling for a job as an orchestra conductor in a school. And then after a 30-year career, he finds that his greatest work in life was not the things he composed, but the lives that he touched and the people that he impacted over 30 years. And I'm sitting there in the theater crying, and I'm like, I'm going to be an educator. And that's the moment where I go, that's what I want to do. I want to teach people. I want to impact lives through music. And so I entered university here at the University of Tennessee uh, with the expectation that I would become a middle school or high school band director or orchestra director, most likely a band director. And I was pursuing that path. I was good at being a teacher and a band director, and I was learning all my methods courses and all those things like that, and fully expected that that's what I would end up doing. In my third year at the University of Tennessee, I started to excel a little bit in my playing ability. And a lot of that was because of the policies of my teacher at the time, who was Don Huff, Hough. Looks like Hugh or Ho, but it's Huff, as in rough. And Don had at that time been at the University of Tennessee for nearly 40 years already. He had been there for a long time, and he had some really solid policies in place. The first of which was that everybody had to practice a minimum of 3 hours a day. I have a few disagreements about that with him, but that was his policy. Every music major had to practice 3 hours a day. You actually had to sign up for the practice hours, and he would come by the practice room and look in the window and make sure that you were practicing during your assigned hour. The second thing was that every trombone major had to have a copy of the Harvard Music Dictionary with you on your person at all times. This was before smartphones and things like that. So what he wanted was that at any given point, if you come across a term in music, or you come across a name of a famous musician or a composer and you didn't know, look it up immediately. And if he caught you without your Harvard Dictionary of Music and Musicians, that was docked from your grade. And then the third thing was that no matter what you played, every time the trombone touched your face, his expectation was that it was going to be meaningful, communicative music, that it was going to be art first and technique second. And so if you think about those three things, that's essentially, Don didn't call it that, but that's essentially body, mind, spirit, right? You got to practice, you got to have essential knowledge, have that Harvard Dictionary with you, and you have to make music in every single thing you do. And so that laid down a foundation for me, and I started to flourish. I started to really enjoy my music making and learn all these things. And in my third year at the University of Tennessee, I see Kirsten Lees Warfield here. I entered the what used to be called the ETW National Solo Competition, now is ATW, and ended up winning that. And I bring that up because in that competition, I knew that I was not going to out trombone the competition. I was a pretty good trombonist, but what I was really good at was music making. And I decided somebody else in the competition might out trombone me and be a better player and have a better sound and a better articulation, but nobody there was going to out music me. I was going to communicate, and I was going to try to move the judges emotionally, and I did. And I ended up winning it, and I ended up winning it another 3 times after that. And every single time, the lesson that taught me was music wins, essentially, right? Obviously, your technique has to be at a certain level so that it doesn't get in the way of the music. But I felt like in each of those competitions, and based on the feedback that I got from the judges and things, there were essentially 2 trombonists and 1 musician, and the musician won. And that taught me a very deeply ingrained lesson, so that when I got a really interesting opportunity a few years later, I was able to walk through that door. Thank you, Kirsten. The other thing that happened around that time is my playing started to be pretty good. I won this ETW competition. And so a lot of the local band directors said, hey, will you come teach all my trombone students so they can do what you can do? And it also helped me earn a little bit of extra money. I was married to my wife by this time. We got married very young, and I wanted some extra income. So I had a studio of about a dozen private students on the trombone. And what I found was that I felt much more capable and much more fulfilled by one-on-one lesson instruction than I did by standing, in front of a band or an orchestra. And so I went to my teacher, Don, and I said, okay, so is there a career where you can have performance opportunities and be expected to play at a high level, but also teach one-on-one lessons, you know? And he goes, actually there is, it's called being a college trombone teacher. So that at that moment, that's what I decided I wanted to do, was be a college trombone teacher and be a studio teacher. And I ended up picking my graduate school based on that set of goals. I went to the University of North Texas because I got a wonderful teaching fellowship that I had a trombone choir that was mine to conduct. I conducted a trombone choir because they had 5 of them, because it's North Texas and they're huge. I had 6 undergraduate students that were my responsibility to teach them in their private lessons. And of course, I had my hands in all the different parts of their program. I was in the 1 o'clock lab band and got a lot of good jazz experience. I was in the Wind Symphony under Gene Corporon and just got all this wonderful performance experience as well. The one thing that I was missing was orchestra experience. So in my first lesson with Vern Kagreis in my master's degree, Vern said, you know, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to do, you know, what you're doing. Interestingly, do I have screen sharing allowed, Jason? Cool. I'm going to share
I think
a
so.
document.
Actually, I think I have to do that.
You might have to enable it. I just want to
Yeah,
share this
yeah.
document with people. Because Vern was all about goal setting, and he said you got to write them down, right? Because writing them down helps you form the plan, and a goal without a plan is called a wish, right? So we have to form goals, and we have to make a plan to get there. So let's see, is that enabled yet?
It should be enabled now. Give it a shot and
Perfect.
see.
Perfect. Okay. So hopefully you can see this page. I know the handwriting is not super great, and I'll zoom in a little bit, but you can see over here on the left side were my professional goals, and on the right side were my personal goals. I filled this out on September 1st of 2006, and you can see that my 10-year goal is to teach at a major university and play in local ensembles or freelance. And my personal goal was to live as close to Tennessee as possible and possibly have more children. The one that makes me snicker is my 1-year goal was to look into starting a family and do some traveling. So I put down that 10-year goal that I wanted to teach at university. And Vern said, look, if you want to teach at a university, that's great. But some of the people that you're going to teach at that university are going to want to be in an orchestra, even if you don't. And you're going to need some orchestral experience in order to really be able to teach them well. So we put, as part of the plan for my spring semester, to start auditioning for orchestras as much as possible. And maybe I'll win some of them. Maybe I'll advance. Really, it was just to get some experience. And that fall, in November, December, I put in a CD for the ITA's Frank Smith competition. I had to record the first movement of the DeMai T-Bone Concerto and the Malcolm Arnold Fantasy. And I submitted the CD, didn't think another thing about it. A month later, I got an email from Vern, and it was all in German. He said, I want you to copy this text into a letter and then send it to this address with a passport photo, and don't ask me any questions. I was like, okay, cool. So I did it, and I put the text into like a translation website called Babelfish, which was kind of like a precursor to Google Translate, I guess. And what it said was, I would like to audition for the Vienna State Opera Orchestra. And I was thinking, okay, Vern, that's cool. I know we wanted to have me audition for orchestras, but that sounds like an expensive plane ticket to go all the way to Austria to just get some experience auditioning in orchestras. And I went to my lesson a couple days later, and I was like, what's this thing about? I'm auditioning for the Vienna State Opera. And he handed me an email, the printout of an email. And the email was from Ian Bousfield, who at that time was principal trombone of the Vienna Philharmonic. And Ian had actually heard my competition CD that I had submitted, the DeMai and the Arnold Fantasy. And essentially he wrote to Vern and said, I think whoever that is the next trombonist of the Vienna Philharmonic. And I looked up at Vern, and he said, yeah, that was you. And I was like, are you sure? And he said, yeah, I checked it like 4 times. It's like, yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence. But he wanted to be really sure that it was the same person. And it turns out it was. And Ian had heard my CD and wanted me to come audition for the Vienna State Opera. I was like, that's cool. And so I would be in an opera orchestra. He's like, no, you're auditioning for the Vienna Philharmonic. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, the Vienna State Opera is the Vienna Philharmonic. At that time, I didn't know that. I really didn't know much about the orchestra at all. The way you get into the Vienna Philharmonic to this day is you audition for the Vienna State Opera Orchestra. And if you're accepted to that, then you get invited to be in the club of the Vienna Philharmonic. And that's when I started to, freak out a little bit and go, well, how am I going to do that? I mean, I don't play excerpts. I've only studied excerpts a little bit. He goes, well, I think we're about to embark on a crash course in orchestral excerpts. I'm like, okay. So we did that. This was late January when I got this letter, and the audition was scheduled for early May of 2007. So I essentially had 3 full months, February, March, and April. And the reason I tell this story when talking about body, mind, spirit is that it was during that time that I really ended up cultivating the ideas that would come to fruition as the body, mind, spirit process. Because what Ian had heard that he liked was he did like my sound. He liked my technique and my clarity. He liked my musicianship and my musicality. It was something that he felt he was not hearing in the other CDs. But over the course of the first month or so, as I'm learning this giant list of both opera excerpts and orchestra excerpts, was I started to concentrate, of course, as many of us do, on just like, don't miss notes, don't miss rhythms, play in tune. I concentrated completely on the body and the mind, right? Get the right tempo, play it in tune, don't miss notes, right? And all of a sudden, I'm like a month or two into this process, and I had lost the thing that had attracted Ian to my playing initially. I was also in a really bad place mentally and emotionally. When I first got the invitation, I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to win this. So all it's really going to be is experience. But then the more I started to prepare and the better my excerpt started to sound, and the more I was communicating with Ian, and he was like, no, you're the guy. I think you're going to win the audition. I started to go, okay, well, I guess I have to win the audition, right? Like, I'm never going to get an opportunity like this. Oh my God, I have to win this job. And I started to put immense pressure on myself. And I got so stressed out. I was over practicing. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't sleeping. I pulled away from my friends. I pulled away from my family, from my wife. It was just like all excerpts all the time, because it's like, I gotta win. And I was at that time I didn't wear facial hair. I still shaved my face, and I would like show up to campus with like half my face shaved and the other half I would forget. And I would like show up in the parking lot of the school and couldn't remember how I got there. I was so stressed out, and I was so in not a good place. And I got very good at hiding it from Vern. Right, I could go into my lessons and just like, yeah, everything's great, I'm good. But Jan, Vern's wife, and another faculty member at the University of North Texas, was too wise to be fooled by my fakery. And she recognized that I was not in a good place. And also my dear friend, Victor Barranco, who recently retired from the U.S. Army Blues, was also a teaching fellow at that time. And so he and Jan sort of took me, and said, Jeremy, we're worried about you. Let's go have a coffee, right? So we went and we had a coffee, and they said, what you have here is a win-win situation. If you go and you win this job, amazing, right? Your career's made, right? That's your big break. If you don't win this job, come back here to North Texas, enjoy your life, and look at what you've learned. Look at the experience, right? The whole point of this was to get an orchestra experience so you can be a college trombone teacher. And it was from that moment where I removed some of those mental and emotional roadblocks, that my playing started to flourish. And also, I started to have fun again. I started to bring the spirit back into the excerpt. So it's no longer just playing a technically perfect Ride of the Valkyrie. I'm playing a Ride of the Valkyrie that makes people envision riding into battle, right? I'm playing a Tuba Mirum that is not only, technically well done, but transports somebody to Mozart's funeral, right? We're all of a sudden we're in like 1791 in Vienna in a stone cathedral, right? It started to become about more than just notes and rhythms. And I was reaching kind of the apex of that when I went to Vienna to audition for the job. Um, I got to Vienna. I played all my things for Ian. I was very nervous because he had never heard me play live. He liked what he heard. He had me play for Hans Strucker, who was the bass trombonist and still is the bass trombonist of the orchestra. They both liked what they heard. They actually called the rest of the section. They said, "We have this person that we really like, but he's never played an orchestra audition before. And so if we send him to the preliminary round where there's like 100 people and he has a bad day, the main jury is never going to hear him. We're afraid he's going to have nerves and get freaked out. So we just want to put him straight through to the finals." And the rest of the section agreed, and they did. They put me straight through to the finals. There were 19 of us there, and I was one of the only people who didn't already have a job in a big orchestra, essentially. And I was, of course, incredibly nervous. And I started to get this kind of like imposter syndrome. Like, I don't belong here, right? I look around and I see famous trombone players and I see people who already have big jobs. And I'm a master's student from Tennessee, right? Like, I don't belong here. This is, out of I'm in over my head. And I hear all of them warming up and I hear all of them playing, and I got really into my own head. And at that point, my goal was like, don't embarrass yourself. Don't get laughed out of the room. So I go into and play the first round. And in my opinion, I don't think it was great. I think it was okay. I didn't embarrass myself. So I came back and I go, I'm happy. I didn't embarrass myself. I didn't fall over myself in front of the Vienna Philharmonic jury. So I'm happy. But then to my astonishment, they came in and said that only two of us were going to go on to the next round, myself and another American, actually. And so at that point, I kind of did the same thing I had done a couple months earlier, where I was like, I have to win this. I'm in the top two. And if I get that close and I don't get it, I'm going to go crazy the rest of my career. So again, I step in for the second round and I'm putting all this pressure on myself. The first excerpt was the second movement of the David, which is very lyrical. It's kind of my thing. It went well. The second excerpt is Also Sprach. And for those that don't know that excerpt, one of the first things you have to do is go up to a high D. D, 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 A, D, but an octave higher. So I launch into the excerpt, and it goes something like, bum, bum, ha. It was really bad. I got a lot of different notes, none of which were a high D. And I finished the excerpt, but in my mind, it's like, it's over, right? Because you've missed a big note in a really big audition. And I hear from behind the curtain, this was still with a curtain, I hear from behind the curtain, they didn't know I was an American at that time, so they go, noch einmal bitte. And I knew that that wasn't the word for thank you or goodbye. So I assumed it was like, play this again. So I did. I played it again. I did get the high D that time, but still in my mind, audition is over. I've lost the job, right? I missed the high D in Also Sprach. So I kind of looked at the proctor, who was Walter Hilgers, one of my very favorite tuba players of all time, was proctoring. And he kind of motioned like, keep going. And in my mind, I seriously thought at that time that the jury had just decided to be nice to me, that I had lost the audition, but it's like, there's only two people left. There's only one excerpt left. Let him finish, right? Be nice to him. So I thought, okay, if they're going to be nice to me and let me finish the audition, I'm just going to enjoy it. And I'm just going to soak this up. This is the last time I'm going to play for the members of the Vienna Philharmonic, so I'm just going to enjoy it. And I looked around and I go, look where you are, Jeremy. And I'm in the Staatsoper in Vienna in this room called the Mahler Saal, the Mahler room. Gustav Mahler was the director of the State Opera for 10 years in Vienna. And over on the wall, there's a painting of Mahler. And over in the corner, there's a little plexiglass case that has Mahler's composing piano in it. And I'm like, I'm playing in Mahler's, room for essentially Mahler's orchestra. And behind that curtain is Seiji Ozawa and 25 members of the Vienna Philharmonic. And they're listening to me. I'm going to milk that. And the next excerpt up, as you might guess, was Mahler's Third Symphony. So I'm playing the solo from Mahler 3 in Mahler's room for Mahler's orchestra. And I honestly don't remember much about it. What I remember was how I felt, that I felt this warm feeling of gratitude come over me for the chance to be where I was at and to do what I was doing. And I was like, I want to play something that's going to touch their hearts, right? Cut to after the third round, everybody said that what ended up making their decision for them about who to pick for the job was the Mahler third excerpt. And everybody said that that's what won the job for me. We did end up playing another round of opera excerpts with the screen down. They eventually said, we want you to have the job. I went to Vienna fully expecting to be there for the rest of my career. My wife and I sold all of our stuff stateside and started over in Europe. I learned German. I bought clothes and stuff that would fit in Austria. And we got a really great apartment. And I started the process of becoming an Austrian person, an American expat living in Austria. My goal was, okay, don't lose this job, get tenured in the orchestra, make sure you get past your probation, and then start maybe like building a solo career and doing chamber music, and maybe take a studio of students, something like Joe Alessi has done for his whole career, or Jürgen von Rien, right? Like, you can play in a big orchestra and have all these other things. The only thing is, Joe and Jürgen and all these people that have done that were not in the Vienna Philharmonic. That orchestra, there's just no time to do anything besides the orchestra. And the people that do it basically have no life. And definitely as a family man who wanted to spend time with my wife and my kids and things like that, it was like, it's going to be orchestra all the time. There's not going to be room for chamber music, solo stuff, jazz, anything like that. Definitely no room for teaching. Also, by the fact that I was an American, there were another couple layers of red tape for me to cut to get a position in an Austrian university or conservatory. It just became obvious that that was never going to happen. And so my life was just the orchestra, and that was it. My wife was and is profoundly deaf. She has an 85% hearing loss and uses hearing aids and lip reading to get by. It was very difficult for her to learn German, very difficult for her to understand the Viennese dialect. She essentially had no friends. She became a hermit, was very isolated, was very unhappy, as was my son. And so I'm, playing this amazing job with this amazing orchestra, traveling all over the world, and all I can think about is my wife back home, isolated and unhappy. After about the third or fourth year, I started to think, maybe this is not for me. It was also about that time that, I'm in the middle of, an amazing concert block, or I'm doing my third performance of Tosca this week. And the music is amazing and I'm having so much fun. But at the same time, I'm like, when do we go home? I was finding myself not appreciating the music that I was making because it was a job, right? And there was so much of it. 16, 17, 18 services a week was very, very, very common. And so I started to think about maybe coming back stateside. I started to think about trying to find a teaching position somewhere. And I called Vern Kagereis, and he told me about this job that was open at Vanderbilt in my home state. And a few days later, I was on the phone with the dean. I did the audition and ended up winning the job. And now that I'm here, I feel like I actually have the job that I was wired to do in the first place, except now I'm actually qualified to do it because I have orchestra experience and all these other things too. And so what's cool is I get a chance to still play in orchestras, sub and do things here and there, but I also have my solo career and chamber music and jazz. And my main thing, what I love to do is I love teaching. I love working with my students at Vanderbilt. I love blabbing to people about body, mind, and spirit and helping people. It's really what I was wired to do. And so, if I had not left the orchestra, I'd be there still today. I would still be in the orchestra. I left by my own volition, but I wouldn't be the person that I am, and I wouldn't really be myself and who I want to be. So that's the main thing. Yeah, I'd still be playing Tosca. And so this is where I say to those young people out there that being good at your job and enjoying your job are not always the same thing as being fulfilled by your job. You hope that they overlap, but they're not always the same thing. I enjoyed my job in Vienna. I was good at it, but it wasn't what really fills me up. And now that I've been doing this for 8 years and teaching, I can tell you how different it is that, I can teach 6 or 7 or 8 lessons in a row to my college students, and my heart is more full at the end of that than when I started. I can do something that's incredibly physically exhausting, but that fills me up emotionally and spiritually, unlike the orchestra ever did. From that, I would like to transition into my little list of things. Jason put the PDF into the chat. I think maybe also it was on the website as well. And basically, it's 11 things that I wish I could go back in time and tell my younger self. All of these things I have learned over the course of time. Would have been great to know them, when I was like 18. Of course, this is a thought experiment. So, I wouldn't change anything about my path because it's led me where I am right now. But these are the things that I would love to have known a little bit earlier. Number one on the list is your playing ability is not your identity or your only source of self-worth. Your playing ability is not your identity or your only source of self-worth. And there was a long time in my life where I needed to hear that. Because as musicians, obviously, your playing and the music part of your life is a huge part of who you are. But it is not the totality of who you are. Putting your self-worth eggs, so to speak, all in the same basket is actually a really bad strategy, no matter what that thing is, right? Even if it's a really good thing. If you go like, my kids, I have 3 kids now. And if I say my kids are my whole life, God forbid what happens if something happens to those kids? What happens when they finish high school and they leave the house, right? Who am I? If my marriage is my whole self-worth, if my music is my whole self-worth, if my job at Vanderbilt is my whole self-worth, what happens when it's not there anymore? I saw that happen a lot in the Vienna Philharmonic, where being a Wiener Philharmoniker became the person's primary identity, and then they retire or something happens to their playing, and they don't know who they are anymore. Number 2, music is not about you. Music is not about you. Of course, we all as individuals get so much from playing music, but ultimately, music is meant for the people we share it with. It's for our audience. It's about what we communicate to them. I had something else I was going to say about that. Oh yeah. The fact that you get some fulfillment and excitement from playing music is fantastic, but it's not the point. It's not the point of music making. I also, under this point, would love to go back and tell myself at an earlier age that because of this, because the music is about serving and about sharing, that I tell my students, you never change the music to fit your playing. You change your playing to fit the music, right? And very often we do that. We will change the music to fit our playing. And sometimes, of course, as a young player, you kind of have to, right? But over the course of a career, what we should aim for is my playing is going to fit what the music needs from me, because it's not about you and how you sound. It's about what the audience gets out of it. Number 3, the grass is greener where you water it. For those that are outside the States, we have this saying, the grass is greener. The grass is always greener on the other side, right? No matter where you are, it always looks better on the other side. This little way of changing that, to me, what I'm talking about is comparison, right? That comparing where you are to another person brings very little good. And of course, in our careers, in auditions and things like that, we do compete and we do compare our music with others. But let the judges do that. Let the people behind the screen compare you to others. In your own playing, it's your job to make the best music you can make, and comparing yourself to others, especially your Instagram friends or your Facebook friends, brings nothing good for you. There's nothing good that can come from that. The grass is greener where you water it. Number 4. Oh, I wish I had known this one. It's okay to not know something. It's okay to not know something. So what I mean by that is there are many, many times in our lives and our educations where we become aware that there is something we don't know. And we end up feeling so ashamed that we don't know it that we don't go out and find out the thing, right? So, for example, I was talking to one of my students one time, and I said, he was a young student, and I said, so in the summer, we're all going to go to the ITF. You should come with us. And I kept on talking, and he said, could I stop you for a second? What's the ITF? And I was so proud of him at that moment, because obviously I just said, we're going to the ITF. I assumed he would know. And he could have easily just let me assume that he knew. But he was more interested in knowing, in finding out the information. So he said, what's the ITF? That kind of thing, I wish I had been brave enough to do much earlier. If somebody says something that you don't understand, if there's a piece of music or a composer or a term or something like that that you don't understand, it's okay not to know. What happens is, once you realize you don't know, then you have to go find out, right? And so, for example, as we all right now, for example, at least in my country, are learning about racial injustice, for example, there's a lot of people who go, I didn't know. It's like, it's okay that you didn't know, but now that you know, do better, right? Learn and do better and improve. Okay, number 5. It's actually a mathematical formula. So potential minus interference equals performance. This comes, at least I was made aware of it from the sports psychology world. The idea is that you have a certain amount of potential, and then whatever interferes with that gets in the way of that, and that's what you end up with as performance. The idea is that if you remove interference, if you take interference to 0, then your potential can equal your performance. And a lot of people understand that. Where I go a little bit of a different direction with it is, I say that interference comes in a lot of different forms. And most of the time when we think about interference, we think about our tone, our embouchure, our articulation. I need to practice more. I need a better horn. And absolutely, interference can be physical. It can be practical. It can be that you haven't practiced something. But there's a whole lot of other things that can be interference. And you can hear that from my story, that there were times that I was experiencing interference in things that had nothing to do with my actual trombone playing or music making ability. It was negative self-limiting beliefs. It was pressure I was putting on myself, things like that. And so think about, where does interference lie in your life? Number 6. It's my little saying, hug the cactus. So what I mean by that, it's a cute way of saying, it's a dear friend of mine a few years ago was talking about a difficult conversation that he needed to have with somebody. And he goes, I know it's going to be hard, but I have to do it. I just have to go hug the cactus. And I was like, I'm stealing that. I'm using that. Basically, it's embracing something that you know is going to be painful, but that you also know is going to help you grow, right? So sometimes that means practicing the thing that you're worst at, right? For years and years and years, I went into the practice room, and the first 45 minutes of my practice was practicing things I'm already pretty good at, rather than going straight for the things that I'm the worst at. That also means having difficult conversations, tackling your personal and emotional and spiritual issues just as aggressively as you will your practice time or your technical issues. Number 7, failure is not only okay, it is necessary. So most of the students that I work with right now, their greatest fear in life is failing in any way. From the small, like missing a note, to the big, like I'm not going to have the career that I want. And that fear of failure keeps them from actually learning and growing, right? So we also have to realize that not only philosophically is failure important, all the greatest people that we know in any field have had massive failures in their life, but also because music and the playing of music is a motor skill. It's something that lives in the same part of your brain as learning to ride a bike, learning to walk, learning to eat with chopsticks. It's not knowledge based. The playing of your instrument is a motor skill, and you actually cannot learn motor skills without making mistakes, without failing. Trial and error, right? We're all so afraid of the error part of trial and error, but that's exactly how you learn to walk. It's exactly how you learn to ride a bike, all of those things. Now, of course, we don't aim for failure. We don't go, yay, failure. I'm going to try to miss as many notes as I can. But we also can't be afraid of failure, because we won't grow if we are afraid of failure. Number 8. I think we're going to end up right at 10 o'clock. This is going to be great. Number 8. Oh, yeah, this is a good one. In 5 years, you will be the same person you are today, except for the people you spend the most time with and the books you read. I wish I had learned this one a lot earlier. My point of saying this is spend time around people who are life-giving. It doesn't mean you only pick friends who have like some skill to offer you, right? But people that bring you life, people that you want to be around. And the books you read. Readers are leaders, right? So I have, over the last 3 years, I've made reading kind of like my second job. I have read on an average a book a week, and it's been one of the best things for me. Mostly nonfiction. What's amazing about the era in which we live is in 2020, we have an access to knowledge that nobody has ever had throughout the entire course of human history. You can think of literally any subject right now, and within 30 seconds, you can download a book by an expert on that subject to your phone. That is a level of access to knowledge that no human has ever had. And we have it. And so go access it. Go read those books. Number 9, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, right? So when you're flying in a plane, they say in the event of the loss of cabin pressure, oxygen mask will come down. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Now, why do they say that? It's so that if you cannot help the people around you if you are passed out from lack of oxygen, right? And so I take that to say that the most caring thing and the best thing I can do for the people that depend on me and for the people that I can serve and help is to take care of myself first. It's not selfish, actually. It's very selfless to make sure that if I am healthy, I can help the people around me be healthy too. You cannot drink from an empty cup. You cannot draw from an empty well. And for much of my career, that's how I lived. I emptied out, emptied out, emptied out, and never did anything to refill myself. And I was no good for anybody. Number 10, be kind to yourself. Um, some of us are so horrible to ourselves. Um, One of the things Ian Bassel says this a lot. If your teacher talked to you the way you talked to yourself, would you study with that teacher? And most of us would say probably not, right? If you went and studied with a teacher and they were just like, you're horrible, you're the worst, right? But we will tell ourselves that, right? Number 11, it's hard to be unhappy when you cultivate gratitude. I don't want to be mistaken. I don't want to be misunderstood here and say that if you have gratitude that you'll never be unhappy or that you'll never have anything bad in your life. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that if you cultivate gratitude and you exercise that muscle in yourself every day, just like you would practicing every day, it just makes it really hard to stay unhappy. Of course, you're going to have things you're going to have, right? I mean, my best friend died of cancer a little over a year and a half ago. I was very unhappy about that. And I went through a great time of sadness. But what part of what brought me out of that sadness was how grateful I am for the friendship that I had with him. And so I've had to learn this. I and all of my students, we have gratitude journals. And I know it sounds super like, but we have gratitude journals where I say, I want you to write down 5 things that you're grateful for every day. And it has to be something different every day. Because most of us are just pretty horrible at actually thinking of things that we're grateful for. Um, and if I don't force myself to think of something different each day, I'll just say the same 5 things every day. I'm grateful for my wife and my kids and my house and my job and for the trombone, right? Um, but I want to think of different things every day to exercise that muscle so that everywhere I look, what I'm seeing is gratitude. That's my talk, guys. Those are the 11 things. And I know we're at 10 o'clock. I don't know if we can go over or if that's like a cool thing, but I'm happy to go over. I would love to answer any questions that you have or elaborate on anything that you would like to talk about.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you. And yeah, we can go a bit longer. If there's any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and chime in. Thank you. That was really inspiring, Jeremy. Thank you. I really appreciate all that.
Thank you, David. I see Catherine.
This is going back to what you were talking about before. Wow, that was like all emotional right now. But what would you consider essential knowledge as a trombonist and musician?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a big topic, but at the very basic level, one of the main things that we can think of are like the music core subjects that we study in college, right? Like, um, it's hard to be an expert in your field if you don't understand the basics of music theory, music history, things like that. So to me, that's the essential base knowledge. The person that I was referring to that came to me and played well and cared a lot, but really didn't have the knowledge, was somebody who ended up dropping out of university due to a family circumstance in their first year. And of course, that happens to people. And there are also many tons of great people who don't have their college degrees. One of my favorite trombonists in the world, Ian Bousfield, doesn't have his college degree, but also he made it a core value of his that he was going to go pursue that knowledge in other ways, not through the university. But I think that's part of the fundamental thing. When it comes down to the actual excerpts and the pieces that you're going to be preparing or performing, to me, the motivating question is context. What is the context of this piece that I really need to understand? Sometimes it's about educating yourself about the composer. Right? If you're going to play something by Mahler, for example, you cannot separate Mahler's music from Mahler's biography. Um, so you have to learn as much as you can about Mahler and about what you're hearing of Mahler's life in that music. Sometimes it's not about the composer at all. There's not that much to know about Ferdinand David. Okay, there's a few things, but there's not that much, right? Nobody's writing a book about Ferdinand David. So then it's more about the context of music at that time. Who is this composer trying to imitate? What style is this composer trying to write? Or for example, in the David, um, you realize that this thing is in E flat. That's the hero's key, and we know that because of Beethoven and the Eroica Symphony. Ever since Beethoven wrote that, every other heroic piece in the rest of history is going to be in the key of E flat, right? So just things like that, where there's contextual things that you need to know that are really important. So a modern day example that I would say is like, let's say um, you go to a bar in Sweden, and there's somebody there who is a professional jazz saxophone player, and they're playing giant steps. And you go up to and talk to them and go, "Wow, it sounds great. What's your favorite Coltrane recording?" And they go, "Who? Who's John Coltrane?" You would think, okay, this person is a professional in their field, but they don't know who John Coltrane is. Or let's say somebody's an expert on the rock music of the 1960s and 1970s, but they've never heard of the Vietnam War. It's like, that makes no sense. Like those two things, right? So that's what I mean when I think about essential knowledge. Hope that's helpful.
Hey, Jeremy, it's Kirsten.
Hey, Kirsten, how are you?
Hey, sorry, I'll turn on my video too. I'm good. Hey, could you talk a little bit about weighing breadth and depth when you're teaching? Because there's in the conservative, there's a lot of emphasis placed on specialization, and I know you made a big point of saying that you don't want to do just one thing. But there are some conservatories that are just like, we cannot expect students to be, to learn how to sing musical theater and opera.
Yeah.
But, what's your take on that as an educator?
Yeah, my take on it, the simple short version is I feel like the era of specialization is over and has been over for a long time. I think it's really just not good marketing. Now, of course, all of us are going to have certain things that we are a little better at than others, right? Nobody comes to my concerts to hear me play giant steps, right? Um, Nobody goes to hear Joe Alessi play, giant steps. Maybe they would. No, um, nobody goes to hear Wycliffe Gordon play the David concertino, right? Like we have things that we kind of are our niche in some way, but ultimately, the more things I can do, the better prepared I am actually for the niche that I'm aiming for. So the way I describe this, obviously, my big break came in this orchestra, probably the most like old-fashioned, stodgy orchestra that's ever existed. But I have a whole talk that I can do on like how my jazz experience helped me get that job. I mean, the short version of it is, if you can play a jazz waltz and if you can learn to like feel the time instead of trying to count it, then you can play a Viennese waltz. When it was time to play the New Year's concert with the Vienna Philharmonic, Ian said, like, don't try to count it, just feel it. And I was able to feel it because I'd done lots of jazz before. Um, I didn't think I was going to use my euphonium lessons. I was so mad at Don for making me take euphonium lessons. But then I show up to the Vienna Philharmonic, and they were thrilled because they're like, "Who's going to play the tenor horn part or the tenor tuba part on Heldenleben? Do you play valves?" I'm like, "Yeah, I play valves." They're like, "Here you go." I actually never played on Heldenleben on trombone until I moved back to the States because they always wanted me to play valves. When I was in college, I joined a klezmer band. I did 5 years of Jewish folk music, even though I'm not Jewish. And but like I'm sitting 5 years doing all these gigs where we're playing like mazurkas and polkas and all these crazy roadmap things. And again, I get to Vienna, we're playing the all the New Year's concert stuff, and it's all the same stuff. basically every experience that I've had has helped me, even in the niche that I'm trying to fill. Um, Also, like, nowadays, I want my students, when the phone rings, somebody's offering you a gig and they go, "Can you fill in the blank?" I want whatever goes in that blank for you to be able to say yes at some level, right? Nobody expects you to be equally good at all things, but do you play bass trombone? Sure. Do you do jazz? Yeah. Can you sight read, a horn part? Sure. It's like I want people to be able to say yes as much as possible. Any other
Yeah.
questions?
Actually, I got a question.
Yeah, lay 'em on me.
Yeah, yeah. So you talk about the three pillars, like kind of mind, body, and spirit, and I sort of feel like building technique and building knowledge. To me, that's kind of easy to figure out how to do that because it's very quantifiable. But passion, like building that, is. I mean, I can recognize it and I know what it is, but it's sort of when I start to think like, how do you actually cultivate that? It's
Right.
a little bit slippery. So I was wondering if you could talk to like how you help your students or how you help develop that or cultivate that in your own experience.
Sure, absolutely. I will take like 20 seconds to put a little bit of a plug in here because we're going to talk about this at my upcoming workshop. We're doing a Body, Mind, Spirit workshop starting on July 20th, and we do have about 5 or 6 spots remaining for that. We're aiming for 20 participants. We got more, so we added some spots. We do have a few spots remaining. I can put the URL in the chat, but we're going to have a whole half a day where we talk exactly about this. But in a nutshell, um, to cultivate the spirit, first of all, you have to remind yourself what got you into music in the first place. Most of that assumes that all of us love music somewhere inside of us, right? We love music at some level. So reminding yourself of that. Most of the people that I work with that are very deficient in the spirit side of things, um, it's because they've either forgotten or it was there and it got beaten out of them by studying music. Um, I judged the ITF 18 and under division a few years back, and I heard all the tapes. And the playing was rough around the edges, but gosh, everybody was so enthusiastic in everything they did, and they were diving in head first. And then a few years later, I judged the Frank Smith, which is primarily for graduate students, and I got 4 tapes into the process, and I was just crying. And my wife comes in, she goes, "Why are you crying?" I'm going, "I'm hearing all these perfect trombone players playing the Martin Ballade, and the music has been beaten out of them by their music education." And so I think just reminding yourself as a matter of course every single day. I do things in my warm up routine, in my fundamental routine, all the way through my day to remind myself why I love this, and to stay in love with it. For me, that's listening to music that I love, or I love playing tunes by ear. Like I'll play tunes by ear in all 12 keys every day, and so I pick a tune that I love and that I just fall in love with that sound right every day, to keep cultivating that. The other thing is I think musicians have to become a student of human behavior and human emotion. And part of that means being emotionally healthy yourself and increasing your own emotional intelligence. Because there's a lot of people who love music and who care deeply about it, but they have no idea how to put that into the sound of the music. And so cultivating, first, emotional intelligence and being able to pinpoint an emotion. You know, very often I'll talk to my students, what do you think is the primary emotion in Mahler's Third Symphony solo? And they go, sad. And I'm like, okay, yeah, okay, it's sad. Anything deeper? And they're like, really sad? It's like, well, how about despair? How about grief? How about loss? Right? Going a little deeper, but then in addition to that, developing a library of sounds that communicate those things. So if we want to communicate grief, loss, tragedy, what are the actual sounds we select to communicate that? What does that mean that we do with our tone, with our vibrato or lack thereof, with our articulation, all of that, right? So to me, those are the three parts: is staying in love with, staying as head over heels in love with music as you can personally, cultivating your own emotional intelligence and fluency, and then developing an enormous library of sounds that correspond with those emotions, right? One of the best in the world at this that I've ever met is Ian Bousfield, because he's an interesting character, and on the face of it, he seems kind of like a goofy guy, right? But he has an incredible emotional depth, and for every emotion he can think of, he can make his music sound that way, because he's cultivated over decades of his career this library of sounds that he can pull out to make something sound more happy, or more joyous, or more tragic, whatever it may be. I hope that answers the question somewhat.
I have a question, if
Yes.
I can be so bold to jump in. Um, so we all have different journeys, and we all have a unique path that has got us where we are, and kind of through this world of music and tromboning and all that. And I, now that I'm kind of I'm in my 40s now, and I have a job, I'm teaching and all that, I realized that my particular journey kind of went in a different order than a lot of people. I'm starting to realize now that there are significant technical issues to the way that I just operate the instrument. And I've always, so for me, I feel like it's kind of backwards. Like you said, you hear all these like technical monsters that are in their early 20s that sound like they have no soul. And I don't believe, like, I think we are expressive, emotional creatures. Sometimes we, don't do well communicating that through the instrument.
Precisely.
So my situation's kind of backwards, and I have to kind of like most of my practice, I feel like I'm at the gym. Like I'm literally just trying to build up physical aspects of playing. So my question is it, some people say that whenever the instrument's in your hands, you have to try to make like the most expressive music possible, and you have to communicate, the depth of your soul. And then some people, they really focus more on like building technique and then kind of layering things at different times and different stages. I imagine that there's nuance and variety to such an answer, but more along the lines of how you approach teaching your college students. How do you broach that as a teacher?
Yeah, that's one of the big questions, and one of the things that I've had to learn over the last 8 years. Because you're right, that is the typical sort of order of things in our industry, is like, first let's work on operating the machine, and then when you're good at that, of course we don't know at what level, like what's at what level are you good enough to then go to the next level, right? But then the next level is like, now say something with it. And of course, whenever there are technical limitations, there's going to be a limit to how much you can express. But I think it's a huge mistake to think of it as a stair-step process. Like, you have to first perfect the machine, then start saying something with it. I think we've accepted as an industry that it takes, like 10 years to grow a great trombone player. But I don't think we've accepted it takes just as long or longer to grow a wonderful artist. And so for me, it's like, start at the most early part that you can at some level. I mean, I have the blessing and curse of being across the hall from our Suzuki classrooms at the Blair School of Music. And, they're playing Twinkle Twinkle or whatever it may be. And I'm hearing our piano teachers with these 4 and 5 and 6-year-old piano students, and they're playing Mary Had a Little Lamb, and they're like, it's not just ba 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 ba, it's ba da 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 dum bum ba dum bum ba dum bum ba, and I'm like, they get a much earlier start than we do. They're expected to make a phrase. They're expected to shape their music. It's actually intertwined from the very beginning. Like, this is how you play a phrase, right? Whereas we're just like, here's how you make sound. Here's how you make it in tune. Here's how you make articulation, whatever, and then we start to try to do something with it. And I think as early as we can start at whatever level that student is ready for, um, it's important to start. With my college students, I have my college freshmen digging into their emotional intelligence, and I tell them when they apply, like, if you are not willing to do that work, this is not the place for you to come, right? If you just want to be someone who operates the trombone well, this is not the place for you. We want you to operate the trombone well, absolutely, right? But I've got them reading Brene Brown and reading all these emotional intelligence books and like unpacking their crap, their garbage, which all of us have. I'm not a therapist, but the expectation is that they are going to do the work that they need to do to get rid of those things, because it's all interference. All of that is interference. And I feel like my job as the teacher is actually, yes, thank you for that book. My job actually as a teacher is to reduce that interference as much as possible, or more correctly, to help the student reduce that interference wherever it may be. And 8 times out of 10, it's like you didn't practice that enough, or you don't know how that goes, or you're not aware of how that phrase in Castor Red should go, whatever. But there's a significant amount of time where there's nothing in the way except that the student hasn't done any heart work, and or they just have no emotional intelligence. They just, all they really have is like happy, sad, fearful, like the 5 basic emotions, right? So I think as early as we can start, the better. And that's just my philosophy. I know it's not universal.
No, it's great to hear. Appreciate it.
As I said before, like, and Kirsten can attest to this. I've very rarely ever been the best trombone player in the room. Very rarely in my life. I was in great shape when I did the Vienna Philharmonic audition. I played really well. But every single time, I mean, from that first year at ATW as a junior in college, where I decided I'm going to put music first, I've not lost an audition since then of any kind. I'll just put it that way. I've always been able to out music everybody. And Vern told me that straight from the get-go in my master's degree. He goes, if you can play musically, truly, you'll walk past the competition because everybody else is swimming the other way.
Hey.
Hi, Dominic.
Hey. My dog's just leaving. How much do you think culture plays a part in everything there? I mean, I grew up in Australia and now live in Germany, and the first time someone said, "Wir spielen Wien bleibt Wien," or "Ein Prosit," and I feel like a total fraud. On the other hand, our orchestra can't swing to save itself. So is that just part of this knowledge and building it up, or is it something you have to deal with?
Culture is always going to play a part, right? Because in the music making thing, there's like all these variables, right? There's, of course, the composer and their biography. There's the intent that the composer hopes happens. There's the lens of me as the performer, and then there's also the interpretation of the audience and how they hear it, right? Because what the composer intended and what shines through me as the musician and what the audience hears could be very different things, right? And culture, of course, plays a huge part in that. To me, that's part of the beauty of music, is that it can always be kind of different that way. But I have a lot of discussions about authenticity with my students, where I talk about it's our responsibility to try to be authentic in the way that we can be authentic, especially if we want to be experts in our field, but that something doesn't have to be 100% authentic to be good or right or acceptable or palatable for an audience, right? So if I think about food, right, so I can get really authentic barbecue here in Tennessee. I can get really authentic Mexican food. We have a wonderful Mexican American population here that have like restaurants just like you would taste in Mexico. I can't probably get really authentic sushi here. I live very far from an ocean, um, and but the sushi I have here in Tennessee still tastes good. I still go get it. Right? It's maybe not authentic to what I would have in Tokyo, but it's still very good. But if I'm going to say that I'm a sushi chef and I'm going to be an expert in the world of sushi, I'm going to want to know how they make sushi in Tokyo. You know, um, and so um, and some of us who did not grow up in those cultures, the best that we can do is get as close as we can. We have to become really good actors. And I also talk to my students about that because we're digging into all this emotion stuff. For example, at 38, I know what tragedy and loss and grief are like. Like I said, I lost my best friend to cancer a year and a half ago. I can now connect with Mahler 3 on a level that I wasn't able to 15 years ago. But I got really good at acting like I could for the Vienna Philharmonic audition, right? I got as close as I could. I had to imagine what it would be like to lose a loved one, for example, or go bury a child, even though I didn't have a child at the time, right? So there's a lot of that. I grew up in rural Tennessee. I did not have any context for a Wiener Waltz, but I got really good at acting. I got really good at getting close to it, right? And I studied it. I immersed myself in it. Another way to think about it is if I want to speak German without a discernible accent, I can get a certain amount of the way by taking a German class or doing the Rosetta Stone or whatever. If I want to actually speak German with no accent, I'm going to need to be around somebody who speaks German with no accent for a long period of time. I'm going to need to immerse myself in that sound as much as I possibly can, so that I can, if somebody that's lived in Paris for 6 months and speaks fluent French is probably not going to sound the same as somebody who's lived in Paris for 6 years, right, or 60 years. So when it comes to music, getting as close as you can and getting, trying to find a thread to pull for yourself and your own context and your culture. And there's just sometimes there's a bridge you can't cross, and there's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't mean anything other than that's just a reality of a global music market where we're now moving into each other's cultures, and you as an Australian can go play in Germany. I as an American can go play in Vienna. That wouldn't have happened 100 years ago. It just wouldn't have happened.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, no, it's sort of always a hard thing to for me to play the Strauss, any of the
Yeah.
Strausses.
Yeah.
In the same way, I guess that it's hard for my colleagues to play Gershwin.
Yeah.
If I say as an Australian that we're closer to the American school.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
It's still not my culture, but it's closer to me than South German. So.
I mean, the Vienna Philharmonic just recorded an album on Deutsche Grammophon of all John Williams music, which to me is amazing. It's going to sound different. It's not going to sound the same as the LSO or the LA Phil, right? Like, that doesn't mean it's not worthy of listening or that it's not worthy art. It's just, it is going to sound different. It's going to be different through that lens. So yeah, it's more of about like acknowledging where we kind of are on the authenticity scale without assigning a value judgment to it, I think is really important.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks for that question.
We have one question in the chat. I don't know if you see it, or I can read it, or can you see it from where you
Let's
are?
see here.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that the one from Lillian?
No, it's from Joe Rabita. Says, I have a question about what if you are not a reader, what if you are just not a reader of books? You mentioned books a lot, many great thinkers and doers do. Is there another medium other than the obvious audiobooks to absorb this information or an alternative? Thanks.
Yeah, I would also say I actually do listen to most of the books that I read, right? Podcasts we're like in like the golden age of podcasting, again, where you can think of just about any subject that you want, and there will be somebody that's an expert in that field that probably has a podcast or something like that. Um, that's really what comes to mind. Or of course, like now everybody's doing a workshop or an online Zoom hang or whatever. It's, to me, it's about having a spirit of hunger for knowledge, and that spirit of curiosity. That you're always. I tell my students that they have to take ownership of their own education. That they can't just show up at school or whatever and expect the teacher to flip open your head and just dump in the knowledge, right? I will do some of that, but there's a lot of it that you have to go get the knowledge as well, just like the great artists of any genre have had to do for all of history, right? There's a lot of that, going and immersing yourself. And so, yeah, besides books, or as he excellently says, that there's a lot that can be gained by doing, right? And by going out and experiencing things. And honestly, I didn't really start reading until probably 6 years ago. But I got in my undergrad experience at UT Knoxville, I gained a lot of wonderful experience just by going and doing. And Don was always just saying, say yes to everything and just go and do it, because you never know what you're going to learn. It's why I said yes to a klezmer band. And I had one gig and then I was hooked. I was like, I'm in a klezmer band now, And I played all these great bar mitzvahs and Jewish food festivals and stuff. It was great. And just like one of our history teachers here at Vanderbilt says, you have to be like a giant whale that just like scoops up everything that's in your path and then decide later what to digest, right? And especially at that time in your life and career. For me, as a grown-up who has kids and a 401k and a yard to mow, like books and audiobooks and podcasts are the way that I can digest and the way that I can fit that into my life. But there are a lot of different ways you can gain that knowledge.
Awesome. I think it's probably a good place to maybe wrap up and kind of finish here. It's just been so wonderful to hear your insight, and your life journey it's a great story. I guess we can just sit with our virtual pints of beer and like listen to this great tale, but just so many wonderful avenues and aspects of what it is we're trying to do as artists and teachers and players and just human beings. It's just so inspiring to hear, your journey. And just thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Yeah.
Thank you all for having me and for listening.
Yeah.
Just a quick reminder. I know, the room is whittled a little bit. I know people have to go and do various things. But the Body, Mind, and Spirit workshop, I did post a link to that in the chat. And you're gonna get you're gonna get Jeremy Wilson vintage. It's I can't imagine.
It's gonna be a lot of this.
Yeah. But I mean, the beard, it's great, right? But
yeah.
But if you're,
I have a face that you want to see the least amount of as possible.
Oh.
You don't want to see more of this face. You want to see less of it.
But if you're in a position where you're looking for some things in some Richmond online, or you have students that are doing so, I mean, obviously, what Jeremy Wilson's talking about is it's on another level from a lot of things that are out there. So do check that out, and at least pass the word along to friends and colleagues. And Jeremy, just thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your gifts and your insight. It has been wonderful to just get to know you a little bit here. And I feel honored to be even remotely considering just a colleague in this big family of trombone players. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for doing this. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be here and share with you. I'm all on the Facebook and the Instagram and all of that. People can stalk me if they want. But it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is great. Really inspiring.
Thank
you.
Everyone.
Cool. All right. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
So we'll, for those of you here, we'll see you at the next hang. We'll send out some emails and
Yeah. Cool.
have fun until then.
Yeah. Everyone be safe. Be well. Thanks.